Awesome. Well, it is 4 o'clock, so we will get this party started. First of all, I would like to welcome you guys all to the NNP Symposium. We are super excited to be able to provide you guys with an experience of being able to come listen to some really great speakers on different numismatic topics. So super excited for that. We are fully funded by the Eric P. Newman Numismatic Education Society. So all credit goes to them for being putting on this event that you guys get to be at today. Two things before we get started. This meeting is being recorded, as are all the other NNP Symposium presentations. So if you want to watch one that you didn't get to see or go and rewatch one that you really liked, they will all be available on our website roughly 2 weeks after the NNP Symposium. So I believe that's April 25th, roughly. But follow us on social media. We'll be posting a lot of really good updates, and we will tell you when all the presentations are up on our website. So follow our social media pages for all the good info. One final thing before I introduce our speaker for the hour. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen, and we'll have a time for Q&A after the presentation. So as you guys think of questions that you want to ask, you can drop them in there, and I will come back and facilitate a Q&A at the end. So I think that is all I have. So I will introduce our speaker for the hour. Jeff, if you want to turn your camera on and unmute yourself, you can do that. So everybody, this is Jeff Rock. He will be our speaker for the hour. The title of his presentation, as you can see, an 18th century female British collector of American coins. So I won't take up any more time. I will let you get right into it, Jeff.
Great, thank you so much. Let me start out by thanking the Newman Numismatic Portal for the opportunity to give this talk and to listen to some very wonderful talks thus far. So hopefully all of you have had some fun and learned some things along the way. So I first heard about the collection of the woman we are discussing, Miss Sarah Sophia Banks, when the debate over the 1776 Continental dollar started, after the discovery of an advertising flyer that she had saved that called those pieces medals. You'll see both of those a little bit later on in the talk. That coin is in the British Museum, and despite having been to the British Museum several times before that and examining a good amount of their coins, it never dawned on me that some of their finest early and federal American coins came from a single collection. A collection made even more interesting because it was formed mostly in the 1790s and done so by a woman. Because of the generosity of the Banks family, that collection has survived mostly intact for over 2 centuries. And it thus presents something unique for American numismatists. It's a snapshot in time that shows us how a serious collector acquired and formed what she called her American Cabinet of Coins. To appreciate the collection, we should know a little bit about the collector. More information can be found in an article I did in the colonial coin portion of Miss Banks's collection, which appeared in the Journal of Early American Numismatics in Volume 3, Issue 1 in 2020. So here are 3 images of Miss Banks, the only 3 I was able to find. Very young, not quite middle-aged, and elderly with a bit of eccentricity going. Miss Banks was born in 1744, and she lived 74 years. Her family was well off, and she spent most of her youth in the family estate in Lincolnshire, surrounded by the collections of natural history specimens and antiquities that were expected of upper-class families. Miss Banks was the sister of Sir Joseph Banks, the famous botanist, who was president of the Royal Society for over 40 years, and who advised and helped King George III with the Royal Botanic Gardens, and who earlier in life was aboard Captain James Cook's first voyage to the South Seas. Joseph, a year and a half her senior, was more interested in natural history specimens, taxidermy, minerals, fossils, and artifacts from different cultures. Miss Banks had an interest in the natural history side of things as well, helping her brother organize his collections after his voyage with Captain Cook, reading through and helping him write up many of his published papers, but her focus in collecting was more on contemporary man-made objects. The earliest dated piece in Miss Banks's scrapbook is from 1760, making her still a teenager when she started. And the collecting continued unabated for the rest of her life. Miss Banks never married, and one cannot easily imagine a suitor competing with her coins, books, and other collections. When she was 23, her brother invited her to live with him and his new wife, Dorothea, in the heart of London at Soho Square. Lower images of the house. It's no longer standing, sadly. Sir Joseph is at the upper left, and his wife, Dorothea, is at the right. Miss Banks lived there for the rest of her life, her collection growing even faster than those of her brothers. At the time of her death in 1818, she had roughly 9,000 different pieces in her numismatic collection, with over 7,000 coins and nearly 2,000 tokens. The latter mostly British, including the 18th century counter tokens that she acquired literally as they were being minted. While that total is impressive, her numismatic collection pales in size to that of her paper ephemera holdings, which included posters, broadsides, playbills, visiting cards, and the like, and which numbered roughly 30,000 different items. One wonders if Lady Dorothea was overwhelmed by the collecting instincts of the Banks siblings, which must have surely crowded most of her home. When Miss Banks passed away, she left her collections to her brother and his wife, who promptly donated them to the British Museum. The 30,000 plus items were the largest bequest to that institution to that time, though 5 years later, King George III donated 65,000 books and 19,000 maps and pamphlets, most of which are now held at the British Library, just a few tube stops north of the British Museum. An indication of Miss Banks's ability as a numismatist and the size of her collection can be found in the words of a contemporary who wrote that he, quote, being in possession of an immense number of tradesmen's tokens current at the time, I left them in Soho Square with a note begging Miss Banks acceptance of any she might want. After a few hours, her footman's knock at my door announced the arrival of Miss Banks, who entered the parlor, holding up the front of her riding habit with both hands, the contents of which she delivered upon the table, at the same time observing that she considered herself extremely obliged to me for my politeness, but that extraordinary as it might appear, out of so many hundreds, there was not a single one that she wanted. Miss Banks was far from a dilettante, collecting what was popular, or a hoarder saving pretty things. The acquisition and organization of the coin collection makes it clear that she was a serious, astute numismatist who knew what she was doing and devoted significant time and resources to her pursuit. She kept track of her collections in several large handwritten journals, buying few duplicates, even in the larger series that may have had hundreds or even thousands of individual die varieties known. This is notable because many of those series lack published references. The coin collection included pieces from, of course, the United Kingdom, but also much of the rest of Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Each geographical region was organized by individual country, ruler, and metal of the coinage. This style of classification mirrored the system that she used to organize the objects in her brother's collections. His collection illuminating the wonders of nature, hers embodying the geopolitical realities of the globe, as well as the coins that would have been in circulation in those areas. While the original handwritten journals detailing her collection still exist, those mostly do not give any sort of provenance information. A few ledger pages from some years exist that do show where she obtained items and at what cost. There were many purchases from established coin dealers in London, most notably Matthew Young, as well as gifts from family and friends who knew that she was a dedicated collector. The years 1793 to 95 from her purchase ledger appear to be wholly intact. And while several colonial American coins were found there, only one federal coin has so far been noted. A more fragile list of coins gifted to Miss Banks has not been scanned yet and will need to be examined in person at some future date. It's worth noting that over 500 individuals gave or sold coins to Miss Banks, and they ranged in every class of society from a porter to a princess. So let's look at some of the treasures of Miss Banks's collection. Late in life, Miss Banks was deemed somewhat of an eccentric, and this early engraving is thought to show her on her buying sprees, complete with servants to carry her purchases home. So looking at the treasures of Miss Banks's collection of American numismatics, we'll start with her colonial issues. But in the interest of time, we'll only look at the most important pieces in that holding. She owned roughly 70 colonial and relevant issues, all of which are illustrated in my article in Gene, along with whatever documentation I was able to locate concerning them. And if you have an interest in those, please go to that source. I should note that none of the coins in the British Museum collection appear to have been cleaned or brushed since they were acquired. And many of the coins from the Bank collection would likely come out much nicer with some light conservation, especially the copper issues. This, however, is unlikely to happen, and the grades that I'm going to give here are rough estimates based solely on the design detail over surface quality, which can change in person. Okay, first up, the earliest coin in Miss Banks's collection of American pieces is this New England shilling. It's Noe 2A, Salmon 2B. It's a rarity 7 variety, like most of the New England shillings, quite a prize. Very fine or so condition with light dents and bends. This is the earliest American coin in Miss Banks's collection, and it was part of a group of Massachusetts and Maryland silver pieces that she received in 1812 from George Chalmers, who was then the Secretary of the Board of Trade. Earlier, Chalmers had lived in colonial America, arriving in Maryland in 1763 and practicing there as a lawyer. He was an ardent loyalist, and when war broke out, he returned to England in 1775, presumably bringing these coins with him. Next up is a coin that's not incredibly rare, but it's incredibly choice. This is a 1652 oak tree shilling, Noe 1 variety, and it's uncirculated. It's the highest grade piece of Massachusetts silver in the Banks collection and was also given to her by George Chalmers in 1812. This particular coin was never clipped, and it actually weighs slightly more than the 72 grain standard for the type. Next up is an undated, although we know it was 1722, Rosa Americana 2 pence, an uncrowned rose variety. This is a 2 pence that was actually struck on a penny planchet. It's Martin 1A-8.1, and it's a pattern issue. Interesting, the coin only grades fine to very fine, part of which is probably striking weakness from the thinner planchet, but it did see some circulation. The Sid Martin book illustrates a very similar specimen on page 336, and these two may be the only examples known in this form. How it made its way across to Miss Banks's collection is unknown. Another Rosa Americana piece, this is a uniface obverse die trial of the exceedingly rare 1733 post-patent pattern, 2 pence. This was struck in steel. This example is AU, likely cleaned in the past and with some light spotting. It's an interesting issue because 2 years before William Wood, who made the Rosa Americana issues, passed away in 1730, he gave a demonstration of his patented ability to make steel using pit coal, something that would have been very valuable to Britain. The patent for making the Rosa Americana coinages was still in effect, and in 1733, 3 years after his death, his son produced an extremely rare pattern striking of a Rosa Americana in copper, with a lovelier design than anything his father had made. There are perhaps 5 examples of the copper ones in existence, but Wood's son seems to have wanted to capitalize more on the steel making patent, and he produced at least 6 obverse die trials in that alloy. How one ended up in Miss Banks's collection? Again, unknown. Next up, This is the 1773 Virginia penny. It's a Newman 1A. It's a choice proof specimen, lovely example with nice coloring surfaces. It's interesting that Banks's family connections likely resulted in this gift coming to Miss Banks either through some official at the mint or in the government shortly after it was struck. 1773 would have made Miss Banks just shy of 30 years old, but already her collection was taking on some important pieces. Next up is the coin that put Miss Banks on the map for American collectors. This is the quote 1776 continental quote dollar. Times change. This is Newman 3D variety. It's gem uncirculated, and it's certainly one of the finest known of the type. The fortuitous saving of an advertising brochure or a flyer by Miss Banks led to a much needed re-examination of this issue in the press, which is still ongoing. The incredible condition of this piece certainly leads credence to the theory that these were struck a decade or so after they were dated, and that they were indeed intended as medals and not actual circulating coins. This is the flyer that Miss Banks saved, and it's pasted in to her handwritten journal. Fascinating piece. Next up, 1787 Standing Indian New York State Arms Excelsior copper, eagle facing to the right on the reverse. This is Breen 990 variety. It's a choice AU example, very well struck, and it's an extremely rare patent coin, one of slightly over a dozen known today, likely the second finest known, just trailing the gem uncirculated coin from the Eliasberg collection. This is a most unusual example to have made its way to England, though it should be remembered that London was a center of a thriving coin trade, with several dealers who would have been on the lookout for choice and unusual things to sell to Miss Banks and other collectors of the time. Next up is a 1796 Middleton token struck in silver. This is a gem-proof example, darkly toned, as often seen on the silver issues that have not been dipped or otherwise played with. This is a gorgeous example of one of the most stunning of all designs in the Colonial American series. This was struck by Matthew Bolton at his Soho Mint in Birmingham, England. And it was struck for the British man Philip Perry Price Middleton, who owned significant land holdings in Kentucky and wanted to start a community of farmers there, something that failed when he was jailed in England for his efforts. This example has, without a doubt, the earliest and best provenance for one of these tokens. It was personally presented to Miss Banks by Matthew Bolton himself on August 21st, 1797. Bolton gave Miss Banks a nearly complete set of the coin and token issues of his Soho Mint in Birmingham, possibly restriking some earlier issues for her using the original dies. He clearly recognized her interest in numismatics, but also recognized the help that her brother Sir Joseph might be able to offer in his quest for striking coins on behalf of the British government. Sir Joseph, at the time, served on the Privy Council Committee on Coin. If so, Bolton was insightful, for the coinage contract was finally granted in May 1797. This Middleton token was given to Miss Banks just 3 months later, in what must have been an extremely busy time for Matthew Bolton. Next up, this is a undated but circa 1798 Theater at New York token, Breen 1055. It's choice proof with light handling marks, which you usually see on the large penny-sized issues. This is probably part of the 18th century Condor token series, where this issue is also listed as Dalton and Hamer Middlesex 167. This is one of a series of tokens struck by Peter Skidmore with dies engraved by Benjamin Jacob and made specifically for collectors. These never circulated. This is the only issue in that series depicting an American venue, the Park Theater in Manhattan, which was built just a year earlier in 1797 and opened to the public on January 29, 1798, with a performance of Shakespeare's As You Like It. There are slightly over a dozen known examples today. Next up in the colonial series, a 1792 Washington Roman head cent, Baker 19. This is a proof example with some light stains, but quite sharp. Miss Banks's journal states that, quote, "A pattern, not approved, done by Hancock of Birmingham, and 6 taken off," unquote. Generally, the information that Miss Banks received was accurate, but today there are far more than 6 examples of the Roman head cent known, probably closer to double that number. The likely explanation is that 6 were originally struck by John Hancock, and even though they did not result in a contract coinage, they proved popular enough with collectors that he struck a further small run. These aren't exactly restrikes since they were made by the same person from the same dies at the same mint within a relatively short period of time, and the two groups likely cannot be told apart today. But if there is any difference between the groups, then this example would serve as a control piece for an original, since we know Miss Banks acquired it before any additional pieces were struck. And the last coin in the colonial section, this is an amazing example of a 1792 Getz half-dollar struck in copper. This has the exceedingly rare circle and square ornamented edge. This example is choice and circulated, struck on a broad planchet with just a little striking weakness at the center of either side. This is a fascinating piece for Miss Banks to have acquired, because unlike many of the Washington pieces that were struck as patterns for a proposed coinage, which were made in England and thus easier for her to come across, this one was actually made in America. The late George Fold stated that the larger planchet-sized pieces like this were struck after the smaller pieces, possibly in January or February 1792, but that there was the possibility that they were struck even later, around 1799 or 1800, as souvenirs after Washington's death. Unfortunately, no record of where or when Miss Banks acquired this example has yet been found, as that may have actually answered the question. Washington, it's noted, was highly respected in England, and the fact that this rare pattern piece somehow ended up in that country is not quite as surprising as the New York pattern described earlier, as there were many, many contemporary British collectors that added Washington issues to their cabinets. There are roughly 60 examples of the plain edge type existent, but just 10 recorded examples with the circle and square edge, 4 of those in museum collections, including this. This is by far the finest known example with this edge device. Okay, so enough for colonials. Let's now look at the US federal coinage that's held in Miss Banks's collection, all in the possession of the British Museum, with the exception of 2 pieces in the Royal Mint Museum in Wales. These cover a much shorter time period than her colonials, from the first issues of the Philadelphia Mint in 1793 to just 1799. Though Miss Banks continued collecting for nearly 2 decades after this, for one reason or another, there were no additional pieces added to her US federal coinage collection. The British Museum gave 8 duplicate US coins from Miss Banks's collection to the Royal Mint Museum, now in Wales, but only 2 remain there. Duplicates were sold off by both museums in the 19th and early 20th centuries, mostly through Swiss coin dealers, so any provenance associated with those coins has undoubtedly been lost. The sold coins that cannot be traced today include a 1793 half cent, a 1794 half dime, 3 different 1797 dimes, and a 1799 gold eagle, which would have been the latest dated coin in Miss Banks's collection. Because of the pandemic and the closure of the British Museum for most of 2020 and 2021, I was not able to get there to examine the journals and the fragmentary purchase records that still exist. So aside from only 1 very special coin, there's no provenance information currently available for these federal issues. It's hoped that it does exist and will be found at some later date. I should also note that while I did view most of the colonial coins, I did not see any of the federal coins while I was there, so grading it will be done by photographs only. Okay, first up, we're going to go in date and denomination order. So first up is a 1793 half cent. This is Cohen 2, Breen 2. Breen lists the condition census for this variety as uncirculated down to EF. And even though this example is not included in his census, it's certainly of that level. It's difficult to grade copper accurately just from a photo. The color balance may not be correct, lighting may be off, and luster seldom shows up. That said, this example looks like it would easily grade AU. And if the surfaces are nice, and there isn't anywhere, it would be a full uncirculated piece. Next up, a 1793 large cent. This is Sheldon 9, and Sheldon notes that there are at least a half a dozen known in full mint state. And this example is certainly one of those. This is a very well-struck coin with some mint luster visible under the toning. Walter Breen graded this one in MS61 and listed it as the third finest known of the variety. In the fragmentary ledger of purchases, Ms. Banks lists paying a penny, a British penny, for a, quote, American cent to Mr. Brady on March 28, 1795, which may well be this coin. There's a 1794 large cent shown next, which is far too circulated to have been that piece. And there's a 1795 large cent, but that doesn't seem likely to have been struck and made its way to England by the date of this purchase. So this may be an actual purchase date and person. Okay, here's the 1794 large cent I just mentioned. This is Sheldon 63. It's the fallen 4 variety, which makes sense when you look at the date. This is the only well-circulated example of US federal coinage in Ms. Banks's collection, though it still grades in the VF range. Given that grade, this was likely a coin that was gifted to Ms. Banks, perhaps from somebody who visited North America and remembered that she enjoyed coins. It's unlikely that a coin in this condition would have come through a London dealer, because at the time they could procure much nicer examples for very little money. Next up is perhaps the most important coin in Ms. Banks's collection. This is a $1794. It's a Bollinger 1, the only variety for the year. In the Jack Collins census, this coin is listed as AU50 and harshly cleaned. But those who have seen the coin in person say that while it is very dark, it wasn't cleaned at all. And they think it grades higher than AU. Where the final grade is for experts to determine. The Collins census also incorrectly stated that this coin was given to the Royal Mint Museum and somehow mysteriously ended up at the British Museum. In reality, the entire Banks collection was donated to the British Museum, who then gave duplicates and unwanted pieces to the Royal Mint Museum. This coin is the only one we found a firm provenance for. This was acquired by Miss Banks on January 16th, 1795, so not too long after it was struck, and it was given to her by Captain James Hawkins Whitshed, who had visited the United States in late 1794. An amazing specimen. Next up, 1795 large cent. This is Sheldon 78, a variety whose condition census Sheldon listed as an amazing pair of MS70 down to only MS65. This one likely grades in the AU range, missing the condition census, but is still a strongly detailed example. Moving into more silver, this is a 1795 half dime. The variety is LM10, and it should be noted that there's no denomination listed for this coin on the British Museum website as of yet. It's clear what it is, though, when you look at it. There are several AU and UNCs known for this variety, and this example certainly appears to be in that grade range. The next coin up is a 1795 half dollar. This is Overton 108, and it is one of just 2 Miss Banks coins remaining in the Royal Mint Museum in Wales. This is a date duplicate for the next coin, though obviously a different variety. And then the following coin was retained by the British Museum, with this one given to the Royal Mint. This is a very scarce variety, and the coin appears fully uncirculated and quite choice. When Eric Newman's own example was sold in 2013, it was thought to be the only uncirculated example known of the variety. That number must now be doubled, but Newman's is still the only one that can ever be privately owned. The Banks coin, I should note, is an earlier die state than the Newman coin. Next up, the coin the British Museum kept. This is also a 1795 half dollar, also with no denomination listed on the British Museum website. This is Overton 113A. If you look closely, the A in states is actually punched over an E. It's kind of hard to see with the dark toning here. And it's a late obverse die state, showing damage between the date and the star afterwards. As mentioned, this is very high grade. It is likely fully uncirculated, but heavily patinated. And I think most collectors would have probably preferred the first example, although the coin was likely not toned when the British Museum gave the other one away. Moving up the denomination scale, this is a $1795. This is Bolander 15, fully uncirculated example with heavy toning. While any uncirculated early dollar is exciting, it's estimated that between 50 and 75 of this die variety alone exist in varying levels of mint state. In terms of strike and sharpness, this example appears to be in the choice category, though a true grade depends on how much luster is visible under the toning in person. Moving into gold, 1795 Eagle. This is variety BD1. There are 13 leaves on the reverse branch. This is a Jimmy uncirculated coin. A collector who had visited the British Museum originally thought that it was some sort of master strike from the Philadelphia Mint. Closer examination showed that wasn't the case, but it is one of the choicest examples known. Some of this variety have fairly extensive die rust around the date and lower hair curls, while this coin shows the obverse in a perfect die state. There are likely 350 of the variety in all grades, and it is extremely rare in this kind of condition. Next up, another 1795 Eagle, but a different variety. This is BD4. It's a rare example of duplication in Miss Banks's collection, though it's unclear whether Miss Banks recognized it as a different die variety and kept it for that reason, or if it was just a gift given to her and she retained it in the collection. This is a rarer variety than the previous one, with only 80 or so examples known to exist in all grades, and uncirculated coins like this are quite rare indeed. Moving into 1796, this is a dime, variety JR6. It's uncirculated and quite sharp for the year, with the usual weakness on the eagle's breast on the reverse. This is the first year that the dime denomination was struck. It's quite rare in uncirculated grades, and this example is among the finest known of this particular variety. Next up, a 1796 quarter. This is Browning 2 variety. It's uncirculated or nearly there. The reverse is a little bit weaker than the obverse, with either some roughness or some toning going on. It's hard to be clear from the photo. There are, unlike the dime, a large number of uncirculated and proof or proof-like 1796 quarters that survive. Several American coin dealers in the 1940s and 50s reported being shown 50 each in uncirculated and proof, and being able to buy 1 or 2 at a time. Either this was an early collector who became infatuated with the design and bought every high-grade example he knew of, or it was a group that somehow remained intact from the time they were minted. At the time, residents could bring silver into the mint and have it assayed and turned into coins, so that is a possibility. Whatever the reason for that hoard, Miss Banks's coin would not have been part of it, because she had obtained it much earlier. Next up, 1796 Quarter Eagle. This is unfortunately called an eagle on the British Museum website, which will be corrected at a future date. This is variety BD3. It's the only variety of the year that has stars on the obverse. There was a reported mintage of just 432 pieces, and maybe 10% of that number survive today, with maybe a dozen or so in mint state, including this example. This is a late reverse die state, which shows the flaw above the word states. The only photo available from the British Museum, if you look closely, has a slight error in lining up the left and right halves of the reverse. So it actually appears that the lines on the shield are a little lower on the right side. Unfortunately, there's a problem with digital photography, and we couldn't get a new example or a new photograph made before the talk. Next up, 1797 half cent, Cohen 1, Breen 1. This is the 1/1 in date variety. And if you look at the 1 in the date, you can see indeed the errant one first punched far too high. This variety is known overstruck on cut down tablet alum and Lee cents, but there's no trace of the undertype visible on the photograph of this coin. It is one that needs to be examined in person though, because the weakness at the lower left obverse and corresponding part of the reverse might be indicative of it being an overstrike. In terms of grade, it looks at least AU with that striking weakness noted. Okay, next up, a very interesting series of 3 1797 half dimes. This is the first of the 3. This is variety LM4. There are 13 stars on the obverse, and this was actually the last variety struck. There are obverse dies known for this date alone. They have 13, 15, and 16 stars. The latter variety looking so crowded that the mint decided to retain the original 13 stars for future dies. This is a difficult coin to grade from the picture. It is at least EF, possibly full AU, but it does not appear to be full mint state. Another 1797 half dime, variety LM1. This has 15 stars on the obverse, the only variety with this feature. This is another rare instance of duplication in Miss Banks's collection, triplication actually here, and it's likely that the trio were retained because Miss Banks noticed the difference in star counts on the obverse. If so, she was far ahead of most American collectors at the time. This is an early die state coin without the break from the bust to the rim at the lower obverse. This one appears to be fully uncirculated, with the eagle's feathers a bit weak, but the obverse quite strong. This is the third example. This is LM2 variety, and it has 16 stars on the obverse. This example is also in the Royal Mint Museum collection, the second of the 2 coins that are still there from Miss Banks. It's a late die state showing the obverse clash marks and reverse die break. The fact that Miss Banks saved all 3 obverse star counts shows, I think, that she studied them closely enough to notice the difference. This one appears to be at least at EF, though it may be a bit higher grade with the eagle on the reverse weakly struck. It's another one that needs to be examined in person in order to gauge what kind of original luster still exists. Moving up the denomination ladder, 1797 dime, JR1, 16 stars on the obverse, with the usually seen die break through the date. This example is uncirculated, or at least very, very close to it. The authors of an attribution guide for bust dimes note only a half dozen or so in mint state for the variety. Like the half dime seen earlier, the dime also comes with different star counts, though this time limited to just 16 stars is here, and the later 13 star obverse variety. Next up, 1797 dollar. This is Bolander 3, easy variety to attribute because the stars on the obverse are aligned as 10 to the left and 6 to the right. This is the only obverse die for the year with stars in that configuration. at least AU, likely fully uncirculated, the obverse with what appears to be some planchet adjustment marks at the center. A rare grade if mint state or close to it, with only about under a dozen thought to exist in that grade. A very important large cent is next. This is a 1798. It's Sheldon 169, and it's an early die state without the break that Sheldon described as occurring on all examples. Sheldon listed a single MS-60 coin known to him, but today it is thought that none of the variety actually exists above AU. Walter Breen lists this particular coin as AU 50 in his condition census and the second finest known of the variety. But that grade was based only on a black and white photograph that he saw at the time, and I don't think he saw it in hand. The coin may actually be fully uncirculated. It looks it from the photograph. Next up, $1798. This is Bollinger 23, has a pointed 9 and a wide date. It's at least AU, most likely fully uncirculated, and in either grade, it's somewhere in the condition census for the variety. The last coin was the 1799 gold eagle that I had mentioned. This was in Miss Banks's journal as going to the British Museum. But the British Museum had a gem nearly proof-like example that was given to them by the Duke of Somerset in 1875. So it's likely that the Banks coin got traded away at some later date. It did not go to the Royal Mint Museum. So that brings our journey through Miss Banks's American cabinet to an end. I hope you've enjoyed this look at a notable contemporary collection, one that has miraculously stayed intact for over 200 years. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. That was very informative. Such beautiful coins, such early examples. Very impressive. I loved seeing all the pictures. That was so cool.
Nice.
And we do have some questions. If you want to stop sharing your screen, that would be good, just so everyone can see you nice and big.
Stop share. There we go.
Perfect. We will get into the questions. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we will get to those right now. First one, as with all collections of early coinage, how in the world did they not get mishandled through the years and survive in near pristine condition?
Well, the sad answer is where they went. They went to the British Museum. Who could care less about American coins? I mean, let's be honest. Most national collections care about the coins of their country or the things that their neighbors produced. America was far enough away that very few American collectors even knew these existed. So they likely stayed in trays, unlooked at, unloved for well over a century and a half.
Wow. Another question, might have missed this, but how did you become interested in the topic?
Well, I came in through colonials. I deal in colonial and colonial early post-Confederation coinage, and traveling to England, going to the British Museum, you of course have to look at what they have. And as I began researching other topics there, I saw more of the colonials and was hoping to see, as I said, the federal US coinage last year or this year, neither of which happened, but will happen at some future date, I'm sure.
Okay, very cool. Were any other Virginia or other state coinages in the collection?
There were no other Virginias that I found in the collection, which was surprising. She had the proof penny, but no half pennies. And the half pennies would have been available in uncirculated, everywhere at the time. Apparently, she didn't think the design was different enough to warrant holding both. There were other state coinages. The Gene issue that I had mentioned earlier, the Journal of Early American Numismatics, all of the colonials are photographed in there, along with whatever documentation I can find. She did have Connecticut coppers, a few Jerseys, a few Massachusetts coppers. She didn't have some things that I thought she might have had, like a Fujio copper, for instance, but they're all illustrated there. The journal should be on the Newman Numismatic Portal next year, I believe. for free. So keep an eye out if you don't already have it.
Awesome. This is not a question, but a comment. Just a thanks for Jeff's presentation. I've been interested in the Banks collection ever since reading about it in David Spink's 18th century provincial token book. So thank you so much.
Yes, her collection of Condor tokens, which is what was mentioned in that book, is the basis of the British Museum's collection of those, and some of them are just superb. I collect that series as well, so that will be a future viewing opportunity, I'm sure. I'll try not to drool on the tokens.
Another one. Did Sarah date her entry in her journal on the Continental dollar? If so, what was the date?
She did not. Unfortunately, for the journals that survived that are now in the British Museum, it's just a listing of the collection by type, by variety, and she gave them a number, likely which tray they were in or something like that. There were very little provenance information, no dates for those. They may exist in other records. We've only seen a portion of what's available there. We have not found an actual date for that, although most of the other colonials in the collection, we were able to find a date and at least a person.
Okay. This one says, "Hi Jeff, thanks for the excellent talk. Following on from the first question, considering that they have been parked in a museum for 200 years, the toning is purely from the storage environment, which is near ideal. Should all lustrous tokens have such toning?"
Well, I mean, you also have to remember that London was probably the most polluted city in the world for most of the 18th into the 19th century, or late 18th into the 19th century. So the toning may have something to do with that. There for some of the pieces I looked at, there did appear to be some environmental damage possibly from it. More so on the pieces in the Royal Mint Museum, which has a much wetter weather pattern. But it's hard to tell just without actually looking at them in person. And the museum is unwilling to brush or conserve, which is probably a good thing, because had they done that 100 years ago, they would have brushed it with a Brillo pad or dipped the silver so that it was nice and shiny. So the things exist today in the state they would have existed untouched for roughly 200 years. That I think we could agree that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Another one. What about any counterfeit halfpence in the collection? Did you have
this question has to be from a fellow collector of mine. I also do collect the counterfeits.
Okay.
Oddly enough, Miss Banks had a very good collection of Asian coppers, which were produced at the same time. She had very few counterfeits. There's an intriguing note she had of one that I'm trying to put the note towards a coin, which I hope to do in a future visit. But I think that even though there were some very unusual and very distinct counterfeits, that they were still counterfeit. And we're seeing them now as old counterfeits, which we can collect. At the time Miss Banks was collecting, they would have been counterfeits of circulating coinage, which were probably a little more problematic to own and probably just not as interesting to her.
Yeah. Another one. Did she also collect colonial and early American medals, many of which we would now call Betts medals?
She had a few. Unfortunately, those seem not to have been photographed yet. There's one really important one that I did finally 2 years later get photographs of, so that I'll try to write up relatively soon. And I'm sure she had others. Medals didn't seem quite as important to her as coins and tokens. She did have some. They were mostly British medals, mostly British European, a lot of war medals and things like that. But she doesn't seem to have pursued those with the same rigor as actual coinage.
Yeah. Looks like we have one more in there. So if anybody else has questions, pop them in there while we're answering this one. says, has Sarah's flyer on the Continental Dollar been seen anywhere else? And is there anything known about the date of this flyer?
No, she appears to have the only one that's been retained since then. There's no date on it, which is infuriating because that would answer every question we have. What is interesting is the flyer, when you look at it in person, it has several folds in it. And if you put the Continental Dollar in the flyer, it fits exactly where those folds are. So she bought this coin from a coin dealer. We don't know who. I suspect Matthew Young, because he was the largest coin dealer at the time, and he actually did print things like this. And she said, I want one of those flyers too. And she wrapped the coin in it and brought the coin or metal or whatever it is home with her and saved both. Had she not saved it, we'd have no proof whatsoever that these pieces were offered as medals for 6 pence, by the way. So far below the dollar value they were supposed to have if they were actual coins, which they probably weren't.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. Very, very fun stuff. Well, we do not have any more questions in the queue, so I guess we can, oh, I saw something pop up. Let's see. Okay, we do have one more.
Okay.
Do you surmise there are any other coin collections yet to be unraveled in other country cabinets?
Almost certainly. I've actually, through doing this, I stumbled on a couple other smaller collections that surprised me, which again, I'll write up. I'm not going to give too much away about them yet. But there's almost certainly stuff in museums where English isn't the primary language. It's easier to find stuff in the British Museum and the Royal Mint Museum because we speak the same language. But I wouldn't doubt for a second that there's things in France. France came to the aid of colonial America, so there were people who were going to be very interested in it. Things may not have survived their revolution as well, but there's probably some stuff there. There's probably some stuff in Germany and elsewhere. We need people who can speak those languages, and we need better internet access to these things, which thankfully the Newman Portal is helping to provide.
Yeah. Awesome. So there are no more questions, so we'll go and close out. But I just want to thank all of the people that attended this NNP Symposium presentation. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope that you tune in to the final presentation of this year's NNP Symposium, happening at 5:30 Eastern Time, so here in about 37 minutes. So we hope you guys tune into that, and we hope you really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you again, Jeff, for speaking and sharing all your wisdom on this topic with us. It was really fascinating, so thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, everybody have a great day. Bye.